Whether we choose to call it divine or whatever, we do have a great potential within us for something. As I mentioned yesterday, we always can get better at whatever it is that we're doing. There's always more and better. It's when that phrase, more and better, we use that phrase in our teachings in the tradition of Paramahansa Yogananda because it was one of the last things that Sister Gyanamata, Yogananda's foremost lady disciple, said when she was on her deathbed. And she was asked, is there anything more that you would like? And Yogananda, she was on in her last time, asked her, tell me and I will grant it. I will grant whatever it is that you have, how you want. And all she would say, just more and better, more and better. And that's true. There's always more and better until we reach that state of divine freedom, when there is no, you might say, infinity itself. There's no more and better infinity. We've reached that point. And so it is that there's always more that we can do. And this impulse to more and wanting more is something that's implanted within us. We don't have to summon up this desire for more and better, because it's part of who we are. Our nature, our very nature as humans, is always to some degree impelling us, pushing us to have something more and better. In other words, we want happiness and we want joy. We want life to be better for us, or certainly we want to avoid suffering. And so we want to improve our lives. And this is it's something that's just part of what it means to be human. And Swami Kriyananda even said it's actually not just human, really. It's something that's in life itself. Its life itself has this impulse to seek more and better. And he says it's that same impulse, you might say, on a lower octave, that causes the plant to turn the light. Sun comes out and the plant, follows the sunlight because it's more and better. It wants to have that. It's seeking something. And it was always Swamiji's contention that, yes, you can define evolutionary processes as you might say, a push from a below, of trying to, natural selection and so forth, of species being pushed in this direction or that by various forces. But it's also true that you could say evolution is also a call towards something higher. It's the nature of life itself toward more and better, which finds its fulfillment finally in the divine search, in the divine quest. When we reach this state of humanity, of having this blessing of a human body, we are given the physical, psychophysical equipment to be able to realize the potential for freedom, the potential for true fulfillment, for which, in the divine way of explaining evolution, this creation was made, that souls might find their way back to divine unity. Now all of us play a part in that. We are our individual part, which is really a collective part, but we think of ourselves as individually, each one of us separated from the other, as we spoke about yesterday. But I'd like to begin by this little story, or not a story, it's a joke that some years ago, 10, 20, 30 years ago, there was all these very popular jokes of how many Poles does it take to change a light bulb, how many Russians, wherever Mila is, to change a light bulb, how many Americans does it take to change a light bulb, depending upon which country you're from, the subject would be from some other country. And how many Indians does it take, or something of that nature. And there was always, you could say there was one, how many gurus does it take to change a light bulb? And of course it only takes one, but the guru has to want to change. Or the light bulb has to want to change. And so it is, it's actually quite true. How many the student has to want to change, because you cannot force, I'm sure all of you have learned this by now, you cannot force easily another person to change. They may conform externally, but to really change outside, especially you have children, that you can do so much, but they have to, from inside, have to be motivated to want. They have to want to change, and it's the same thing with us. I mean, force doesn't work so well, but when we want to change, then we decide to summon up whatever it might take to make that change. But there's a resistance to change, and we look and we see ourselves. We resist. We don't want that. There's entropy plays its part of keeping us just the way we are, until finally we decide enough of that, and we become unhappy. We've played it out. Maybe it's lifetimes. We've played it out. I've done that role enough times. I just want something else. I just don't want rice and dal again. I just can't handle it again for lunch. That's sort of you might say, a foreigner's complaint. Or whatever it might be, I can't stand pasta anymore. I have to have something else. And whatever it might be, we decide in our own lives, we want to come to a point that we want to make that change. And no matter what level of spiritual understanding, and whether it's being propelled because we're suffering, boredom, you might say, is a form of suffering. We're bored, we're suffering, or I think this is probably a better motivation of why we might want to change. We see the potential of something better. We're given a glimpse, perhaps. We just got a little glimpse of something beautiful, and we want more of that. And I think this is certainly a better motivation to change. But whatever it takes, we come to that point. And it doesn't matter if we're the leaf going to sunlight, or if we're a great saint on the verge of realization. There is still that motivation of wanting something more, and there will be that bit of motivation as long as we're embodied in this, or identified with this body, as long as you could say, we have ego identification, because we're playing in the ocean as a wave, as long as we have that sense of identity. And a wave has got always will and always has a high point, and it has a trough. Now, a person, we were speaking a little bit about this at lunchtime the other day, is always, as long as there's, and I think we were discussing the question, is it easier for a person who's very close to that point, and there's just a little high point of the wave? It seems like it might be, but I think it might not be necessarily easier, because I think a saint feeling any fault within themselves will probably be pained. Because my observation is those people have very little, you might say, elevated consciousness. They're rather brutish in their approach to life. They don't seem to care about anything. If they hurt somebody, or if people that do very unhuman type things to other people, they don't seem to care at all. It's not painful to them. Whereas a saint, just even the little mistake hurts, because they're aware of the divine potential, and anything that's short of that might actually be disturbing to them. Now, that's certainly not an advertisement for wanting to become a saint, but nevertheless, there's the other side as well. The saint sees the potential, and that draws him, and he wants that very much. And as long as we have that longing, which on the one hand is, the painfulness of the heart has a hole in it, you might say, but it's also that's our divine gift, to actually see our potential, to see what we could be, and to be pulled by it, and to be reminded by it, even when we fall short. This is why when we make mistakes, we feel remorseful. But yet, it's better to be remorseful in the long run than to have no remorse at all. If you're not remorseful, what's your motivation? The fact that you're remorseful implies that you have a sense of elevated consciousness to want to attain something, and so that's good. And this is implanted in all of us. As long as we have this ego, there's going to be the ups, and there's going to be the little bit of down. And so what spiritual life is learning ultimately to come to that point where we transcend that ego consciousness. Paramahansa Yogananda, explaining these are very cosmic principles, said the ego does not, might say, totally disappear. It's transcended. We transcend the ego, but it always remains. Now, this was a sort of interesting concept. He says the ego, but we're not identified with it any longer. The cosmic sea, as he said in his poem, watch the little ego floating in me. He's transferred his identity to the sea, not to the wave that's in the sea. And so that was a bit of a mystery, and one of the disciples asked him about that. He said, yes, it always remains as a memory. You might say it's a divine memory in the cosmic ether. And that ego, that identity, that personality, that spark of individuality can be revived. And he says this is why when you pray to a great saint from the past, say if you're a Christian, you pray to Christ, perhaps you have the vision of Christ. Christ appears to you. He says the divine reawakens that memory at the behest, at the call of the sincere devotee, and it takes that form, but not ego in the sense of the negative side of it, that identification side, but in the sense of that individuality that was once there, and once there is never lost. It doesn't go into a great unknown. It only becomes a memory in the divine memory, you see. And so and you could say the difference is between that, an ego such as that, and what the ego in which we reside in, is there's absolutely no attachment anymore. There's no attachment. And that's our problem, is we live in a world where we're attached to this ego. And it's said that this is the why we can't remember our past lives. He said, Krishna says in the Gita, he says, I've lived many lives. We both had many lives, Arjuna, you and I. The difference is I remember mine, but you don't remember yours. And so it is for all of us, that we have many lives in the past, but we don't remember. And why? Because we're attached to this one. We're so attached to this identity that everything else is blocked out. But when we begin to withdraw, we begin to remember, I played all of those parts. And it was just, you might say, a flow of energy that was flowing through all of these different forms, and now taking the form of this one. I think if you look, we're talking today this in terms of tools of transformation, tools for change. We want to reach our potential. I think the first thing we probably want to ask is, what is our potential? What would you, in your life, like to become? And you could think, yes, cosmically, I want to become the cosmic ocean. I don't mean it quite so vastly, but let's bring it down a few octaves from that. What in your life, in this lifetime, I would like you to think about this, because what we're going to do today, I've asked staff here to make us a fire. We're going to have a fire this afternoon, and we're going to do just a very simple little ceremony. And we're going to light that fire. And I want you, and we're going to throw two things into that fire, little pieces of paper. And after we have our break, we'll hand this out. I want you on that paper, on the one piece of paper, I want you to write what you reasonably feel you would like to achieve. What are you striving for in terms of your potential, which is, we've been talking about these. What is it that you want to develop? And let's not make it, I want to be a perfect saint. Let's take it down, because we all want that, but we want it in our own unique nature, according to our own unique nature. Each of us has a certain something that we're trying to perfect. Like each of us are a stained glass window, each as beautiful as the next. And we're wanting to rub off the dust or whatever is obscuring that light. And if we were to rub that dust off, what would we see? What would we see in each of us? What might we want to perfect? Now, if that's too hard, maybe there's a quality that you want to think about. Or maybe there's something you've thought about, maybe you'd like to do. A vocation, perhaps. Some of you might be thinking along those lines. Yogananda said, in his readings, I remember him saying, he said, a person, when you're thinking about what to do in life, he says you should analyze yourself. What are your tendencies? What's your nature? Just try to remove yourself, detach yourself a little bit. What's your nature? What are you inclined toward? And he made a interesting statement. He said, if you remember back, he said, most people's inclinations for that lifetime are formed by the time they're 12 years old. Now, they haven't been able to, you might say, give them exact expressions, but their tendencies of what they're wanting, you might say, to express in that lifetime usually exists by the time they're 12 years old. And then they're underneath, you might say, propelling with, perhaps the fellow always wanted to be a great explorer or sportsman or something like that, and it was always under there. And then what happens is we go to school and we get up, and the fellow who wanted to be a great sportsman ends up, becoming an accountant because he wanted money, or something like that. And there's probably going to be always a little bit of a conflict in there. I wish I could have done this. And it's better, if we can, to look at our life and what are we doing with our lives to do something we love, if possible. If we're doing something we love that's in tune with our innermost aspirations of what we want to express in this lifetime, if we can do that, we're usually going to be more happy. But of course, we then, and even Yogananda would say, and being a very practical man that he was, you have to balance it with practicality, of course, as well. And my daughter she wanted from a very early age, I could see. My wife and I, Sada Devi and I could see. She was not going to be an accountant, I could tell you that. Adding those sums up wasn't going to make it, and I could see she had a certain disposition toward art, toward working with people and art, but the sciences and that, which is my nature. I'm a little bit more that way. I learned quickly to back off of that because it wasn't going to work. And so we started giving her art lessons, finding people who knew how to do art and crafts and those, and putting her in that association. Sure enough, she grew up and she is an artist. But at the same time, she does art for a good portion of the year, takes off, but then works by contract as for Nike. The other half, which is her practical side, so she's balanced. She has to pay the bills, but her heart says she wants to do this other, and she tries to bring the two together. But so it is. We have to be that way. But be practical. But look, what is it that you really is going to give you a sense of accomplishment of what your heart wanted to do? And if you could bring those two together in your career, some people want to be very serviceful. They're just always helping other people. That's what and so perhaps they become a doctor. Or anything really that can be served. Anything can be turned service. Doesn't have to be a doctor. But they express that servicefulness through whatever it is that they do. And so in this way, we see that this is what I'm going to ask you to do, is what is your aspiration? And write that on a piece of paper. I'm then going to ask you on the second piece of paper, but I won't tell you that yet until I come to it. We're speaking about making changes in our lives and the tools that we might want to develop to make changes in our life. But my observation, if I would say, of my life and other people's life is I don't think people change all that much in one lifetime. Some people do. There are exceptions to that. But what I've noticed is that people don't change that much. They just really don't. What they do is they refine their natures, is what I'm speaking of. That nature that's there when they're a child, they refine it, they mature it, they bring it out. You might say they bring out the good qualities, they bring out or the others, and they rub that stained glass window clean. But it's not so much of becoming very different. I think if you look at your life, it's probably similar to mine. I said, yes, I'm still me. And I remember when I was 12, yeah, I was me. You know, and then at 18, 24, yeah, I'm still me. And now I'm still me. And I look, and well, this body has changed over all this time. But yet I also look, I have changed some of the qualities. Maybe gotten rid of a few that I'm happy to be rid of. And there's others that I would have liked to, but I was not very good at, and I've become better at it. And those, so you see that is there. So there are a few things we can change, and we can, but much of it is refining who and what we are. A good image, I think, is a river, where we are a river of energy, a river of life force flowing. And you might say, just as the river flows, the farmer along the sides of the river, they get their hoe and they make channels to divert the river into their fields in this way. And we're like that. A river of life force is flowing. When we get our hoe out and we channel it in this direction to irrigate here, irrigate there. And then when we want to change, we block up that river and we channel it over on that river, over in that way. But the river is flowing. And I think we aren't those little channels. We're the river. We are the river. And if we back up and we see all these little channels, it's just going off in this direction or going off in this direction. But the river is going to flow, and it's not the channels. So if we close off this river, the river is still going to flow. And if we don't perhaps let it out in some other channel, it may overflow. And so this is the same. Much of our character is like this. We're going in one direction, we're going in this direction, and we can redirect that flow of life force, that flow of who we are, into many, many different directions. And we shouldn't, this is one reason, we shouldn't think of ourselves as this physical body or this physical, what we are right now, but think of ourselves as that flow of life force. We are a flow of life force. And we have, through incarnations and incarnations, developed certain channels, and it's been flowing in those channels for so long that we begin to think that's who I am. But we're not that. We're not that. We're something entirely different. We're more that energy flow. Now you could say maybe even beyond that we're something else. But from the perspective of where we sit right now, if we think of ourselves as that flow of life force that happens to be going in this way, but it doesn't have to. We can open up some completely different direction if we choose to. You get a little bit of water going in that way, and it begins to flow and becomes deeper and deeper in that channel. Pretty soon it's very difficult to stop it from flowing in that direction, and it becomes an ingrained habit. So that's how we are. We can change that. But what does it take to make that change? It takes that water, it is going to flow. It takes that farmer, he has to do something about it. If it wasn't for him, it could go, who knows where it would go. But he decides it goes into this field. And so it is for us. We have the ability to make the choice of how to direct that water. And that choice is probably our most important tool that we have. We have the ability to choose where the life force goes, where our life goes, what we will develop, what we won't develop. And that choice is the expression of our free will. We can choose that. I'm going to wait for Mila to come down. So this is you could say this is our divine gift, because it is a divine. That is the divine gift, especially the divine gift that separates humans from the lower life forms. Is the ability to make that choice. So we can choose that, and that we can choose, and where we choose is up to us. And this is what much of the teachings of yoga, although it's not overtly stated this way, although Yogananda does pretty much start at this point, starts with this point. Improve your ability to choose. Increase your ability to use your will. Now, it's often not said that way, because the will is often misunderstood, because it's sort of a person of great will, and because it's usually channeled egoically, it tends to express itself badly, or can at least express itself badly. But without that, we cannot make any changes in our life. So actually, the will, the beginning of the spiritual quest is the development of the will, and making that choice. I want to make a change in myself. I want to do something about my condition. Just that alone, that decision is where the spiritual life begins. It's really where our life begins. It's the quest for happiness, the quest for joy. Is to pick our life up by that point and strengthen it. And then, of course, the second thing is not only just to strengthen it, but to learn wisdom so that we strengthen it and direct it wisely. And that's unfortunately what the missing element is in people who don't use their will wisely, is they misuse it. But nevertheless, without it, we can't make any progress. There's the other side of that equation, the other side of that issue of will, is we have to make the choice to do something, and then we have to be willing or have the ability to stick to it, to not give up. Even if it takes a lifetime, it takes 2 lifetimes, it takes 3 lifetimes, whatever it takes. If we set our mind to something and don't give up, it has to happen. Paramahansa Yogananda said, you can become and achieve anything that you set your mind to, if you summon your will and you refuse to give up. He'd like to tell the story of the squirrel who was walking with the squirrel and the babies along the seashore, and the wave came up and washed up, and the mother squirrel ran from the waves, but the babies were too small, and the babies were washed out into the ocean. Well, the mother squirrel was so distraught and angry at the ocean that it went to the ocean, and he says, you must give my babies back. He says, if you do not, I will dry the ocean. And the squirrel began to go to the ocean, took its tail, and it would run up to the dry sand and shake its tail in the dry sand, back to the ocean, wet its tail, run up under the dry sand again and again and again and again. And of course, the ocean laughed, because this was not going to dry the ocean. But nevertheless, the squirrel would not give up, and persisted and persisted, and says, I will not give up until you give my babies back. Until finally, the ocean, seeing the determination of the squirrel, said, I give up, I give up. And the wave washed up, and the babies washed back up. That sort of is the determination that we need to have. There's a story that I first heard when I was in the United States, and I'll tell it again, but I have to change the characters, because in the United States, you'd use different ones depending upon what country you're in. But it was the story of a sports coach, and the sports coach had a basketball team, and he was the big game was coming up, and they were ready to play the big game, and as coaches do before the game, got the group together and gave them the pep talk. We're going to win this game, and whatever we do, we're not going to give up. And yes, and they were rallying their enthusiasm for the game about to begin. He says, all of you, you've heard of Mahatma Gandhi. And they all say, yes! He says, did he give up? No! He says, now, do you know Milka Singh? Great runner. Okay, you've the foreigners may not. But he says, you've heard of Milka Singh, haven't you? He says, yes! Did he give up? No! You know Sachin Tendulkar? Yes! Did he give up? No! You know Rajiv Chatterjee? Who's Rajiv Chatterjee? And the coach says, he gave up. so use that story in your own country. But in a sense, that's not to give up, and that's what it takes. If we have to have the will, but we also have to have the persistence to continue with the will. And then if we do, no matter if we have at least the mental attitude that I'm going to do this, and with God's grace, what happens is, if we show that, and this is, you might say, the underlying principle of the story of the squirrel. If you put that principle out, Yogananda made an interesting statement. He said, people think that circumstances in this world is simply inert matter. It's not. That circumstances will begin to conform to the power of the individual will. That with a will that's strong enough, it begins to influence the very universe itself circumstantially to conform to that will. Because the will, on a very subtle level, is a force of energy that is going out. And a force of energy, a movement of energy, has properties to it. It has magnetism. The will directing energy in a particular direction, begins to attract to itself the circumstances needed to be able to conform to it. And this is why, if in the Bible, there's a phrase in there, if you say to move that mountain, and it will be so. I'm not enough of a biblical scholar to quote that exactly right, but the idea being, the idea being that a saint or a God-realized person, if it says his word becomes binding on the universe, because it's strong enough the circumstances begin to conform to it. And there's a principle to that, and so it's magnetism. So if we were to say tools for transformation, well, I've mentioned will, and of course the greater the will, the greater. Did you teach this yesterday?
No.
You didn't. This is the starting point. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. This is they go together. Will and energy are related to each other in the individual. The greater the will, the greater the flow of energy. The greater the flow of energy, life force, the greater, just as energy through a wire creates an electrical field, a magnetic field around it, the greater the magnetism. And so the greater the will, energy, magnetism begins to attract to oneself. And this is the secret of much of accomplishment is life of not I am doing, but attracting that what we need to our life. We attract circumstances to ourselves according to the level of our individual magnetism. And I think you can see, and it's generally spoken in language, that people have magnetism of some sort or another. Some people are magnetic all sorts of ways. They have magnetic personalities. Some people seem to attract success to themselves. Some people are lucky. That fellow's so lucky. He always seems to, win. And why? Well, we attract. We have certain magnetism to us. And people, you can see, if you go, it's interesting here, I've observed, and I don't know what the magnetism is, but you know our dog here, Mama Dog. You've probably seen Mama Dog, or maybe you've heard Mama Dog if you haven't seen her. Some people will come, there's strangers from the area here, villagers from there, will walk on the land and immediately, and I said, why is she outside? And other people come, she doesn't say, she's very sweet and loving. There's some sort of, animals tend to recognize something in people that we can't see, but they know that, and this is what they say, that you don't want to show fear around certain animals, because they can sense that magnetism, they can sense the fear, whether that's chemical or whatever, I don't know, but there is this principle at play. So that's a second tool that we're speaking of, or maybe that's three: will, energy, greater the energy flow, determination, persistence, and then magnetism comes out of that. But there's another side to that also as well, and this is going to bring us to the side of that point of that other piece of paper I mentioned, is besides will, there is, you might say, if I try hard enough, I am going to be able to attain my goal. Try hard enough, I'll attain my goal. That's true. That is true. But as you struggle to attain that goal, you'll also notice that there are impediments preventing you from attaining your goal. Something comes up. Why didn't you succeed? Well, circumstances didn't allow me to succeed, or this was in my way, or that was in my way. And then the next question is, well, why didn't you overcome those circumstances? Well, because, whatever it might be. And if you look in your life, if you see you have the potential, and I've asked you to write something, what would you like to accomplish? What is it? Then I would ask the second question of what is preventing you? What, from right now, tomorrow, today, what is preventing you from accomplishing that? Now, maybe it's fear. Maybe it's, could you fill in the blank, whatever it might be. But also, I think what you'll see is there's often reluctance too. There's something holding you back from achieving whatever it is that you want to achieve. There is something, or you'd be there right now, but you're not there right now. So what is it? And if you look within, you'll find that it's often there's a reluctance. Something, it's like if we were to have a heavy object and we're moving that heavy object. If you've worked for a moving company, you probably know that you find little rollers you can put something on, and you can roll that heavy object to the truck and put it on. Or you put sandpaper on the ground and try to move it on that. It's going to not be so easy. And so what is that sandpaper in our life that is preventing that? In a general sense, in our teachings of Yogananda, we speak of two qualities. We have will, and this other concomitant quality is willingness. Willingness, the willingness to do something. Oftentimes you say, if you ask somebody, would you do this? No. They're unwilling. And you ask yourself to do something. I ought to do that. But you don't want to. You just don't want to. You're unwilling. In other words, it's going to take energy, but you don't want to summon that energy up to be able to accomplish it. And that unwillingness is, I think, probably more important in some ways than the will itself. Because I think will is somewhat natural to us. We want happiness. We want to be better. We want to grow. It's our nature. The unwillingness is more of the things that are more difficult. Why we gain those, I don't know. But there's something resisting us. And so this afternoon, besides writing what you want, I would like you to think between now or after we take the break. Think about what is the obstacle that you would like to overcome? And what is it? What is the unwilling? What is it? What's happening there that prevents you from doing that? And then we're going to offer both of those into the fire and feel symbolically, you might say, just to be able to get rid of those things. And with divine help, of course, would be useful. So there's another tool, you might say, unwillingness and being willing to and have, Swami Kriyananda, he had a phrase that he would like when he spoke on this subject. It was he liked to write music, and he had one of his early albums that in the days when they still had the LPs, records. He made a couple of records in 1960s, it must have been, and one of them was called "Say Yes to Life," and that's why his songs tended to be very. There's joy in the heavens, a smile all around, and they started to be kind of like yes-saying type positive songs, and now he included those in that album. And say yes to life, and something comes up to you, and you might even make that a little mantra for yourself. If something comes up, say yes, or at least be willing. Let's rob the bank. Yes, no, I don't mean it like that. but most people, as opposed to, hey, let's help me clean up and put the chairs away. No, or help me do it. No, and then. Often I find people they habitually say either yes or no, and then they think about it. I think it's probably better to be one of those who says yes first, and then thinks of maybe wait a minute. Rather than the other way around of saying no, because then you're stuck. There's no movement, you see. And unless you have movement, nothing happens. There's no magnetism. There's no energy. There's nothing, and you're just stuck. But if you're moving, at least you're moving, and then you bring into your life another quality, a tool that is needed. You see, at least you're ready to use this next one. If you're not moving, you don't need it. And that is, it's like pedaling a bicycle. First, you have to pedal. Then what comes after pedaling? Okay, now you're pedaling and you're going. You also have this handlebars here. You have to steer, and you have to then come steering. So if you say yes, first I'm going to pedal. Now I have to point my bicycle in the right direction. No, maybe I won't rob the bank. That's not such a good use of my energy. But at least you're moving, you see, and so you have to So you have energy, you have the willingness, and you're going. The next thing comes is you have to then have some inner guidance as a tool of what to do with it, how to get there, how to get from here to where I want to go to realize my potential, realize whatever change it is that I want to make in my life. I need to be wise about my decisions. And so this is, you could say, comes under the broad topic of guidance, but I think from day-to-day use, maybe we should put it under the title of intuition, is using your intuition, because intuition is, you might say, a higher guidance, not just guidance of what your bank robber confederate is guiding you to do, but your higher intuition of what something larger is trying to direct you to do. So intuition, and this is a tool that comes naturally as the fruit of meditation. This is, so yes, I could say meditation is a tool for transformation, but how does that work? How does that, it might be better to say meditation is a tool for transformation because one, it gives you inwardly an experience of something toward which you can aspire. Perhaps you are inspired by something, you feel joyful, feel happy, and so it gives you a goal, but it awakens this through intuition. Your intuition in terms of how to get from here to there is awakened. And if you took our workshop, we also introduced in that workshop another tool which precedes in meditation and intuition, and that's concentration. You have the energy flow, you have to be able to concentrate that energy flow. Anybody who's successful at anything, achieving their goals, has energy to do it, and they have concentration to be able to focus that energy. And in meditation, we focus that energy on something higher, and the result is a direct perception of something inside. And it's that direct perception that is intuition. Intuition is the direct perception of reality without the use of the physical senses. I'll say it again. Intuition is that tool, that capacity within us to directly perceive without the use of an intermediary tool, typically the senses. Now, is that possible? To directly perceive reality without the use of the senses? What do you think? If you were to turn off all of your senses, and would you just be unconscious? Well, I've been thinking. I'll just let you think about it. You can think about it. What would happen if you turn off all of your senses? You might not be aware of the immediate surroundings, but would you be unconscious? Well, I don't know. Depending upon the level of your awareness to begin with, might have something to do with it. Let's say Mama Dog, if she didn't have any sensory perception, what would be her state? I don't know. But I suspect if as a human, you turn off those senses, you would not be unconscious. You would not be unconscious. And if you think about what we are doing when we are meditating, we are turning off the physical senses. And when the physical senses turn off, our awareness, if we have some awareness, does not turn off. We become aware. And in meditation, we become hyper-aware. We become super-aware because the senses are blocking our ability to directly perceive because we're using them as the intermediary, and so we become habituated to them. And so when they turn off, we go, oh, what is there? But if we train ourselves inwardly, we begin to slowly not rely upon those senses, and an inner awareness of our reality begins to unfold, and we begin to discover that there's something inside of us that's very aware. Awareness doesn't go away. Awareness then begins to increase, and we're very aware. And we're aware of something more subtle than what our senses can give us. Yesterday when I was starting, I was talking about science and various aspects of science, and many things are happening around us right now. Radios are playing, and the waves are going right through us right now. We can't hear them. There is all sorts of sound vibrations that are happening to us right now. We cannot hear them. The Mama Dog probably hears some of them, but we can't. We can't hear those things. The atoms themselves are vibrating. We can't hear them right now. Light waves, electromagnetism, all sorts of things, even beyond what science knows is happening right now. But our senses cannot pick them up. But when we begin to withdraw from the senses, we begin to become aware of other realities that are here right now that we're not able to perceive not because they're not there, but because we're addicted and habituated by our senses only being able to perceive through the senses and thereby blocking out everything else. And because it does that, we have not developed these finer capacities, but they exist. And this has been the testimony of saints and sages throughout history, that if you would only be still and look inside, you'd be able to see something else. There is an inner kingdom that is spoken of in all traditions, true major, true religious traditions, that there is this inner kingdom there that is awaiting us if we choose to perceive it. And that coming back to where we started, if we choose to perceive it. And if we say, yes, I do want to perceive it, then, of course, and that's the area of philosophy, that's the area of Sankhya philosophy, why that might be a good thing. You're not going to find it this way in Vedanta philosophy. It says, no, you won't find it there, but you will find it here if you do this. And in between the two, you have the science of yoga that says, here, if you want to perceive that, here are the tools that you need and can use to be able to perceive it. And then the testimony of saints and sages throughout the centuries and millennia saying that this can be a reality. And so this potential is there for all of us. And I think it is a potential that we're all going to move toward, whether we want to do it in this life or not because we're forced to, but because it's attractive and it's what our true nature really is. That's who and what we really are. And you might say we're being called back home to our true origin, which is expansion, bliss, Sat Chidananda, as Shankara defined it as, Sat, the ever-existent, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss is how he defined the ultimate reality. Total consciousness, total existence, ever-existent, total bliss. And that exists before this creation and will exist after this creation. And we have that spark within us, that you could say that little spark of Kutashta consciousness, Christ consciousness, Krishna consciousness. That spark is within each one of us, waiting to be kindled and exposed and lit. The tool of transformation is environment, putting ourselves in the environment that will allow us to become like the environment. We take on very subtly, unconsciously, not with the conscious rational brain, which is what you do when you read, but you take it on by the attunement on a sort of a associational level, and you become that. There's I feel a certain power after doing ceremonies like that, a certain calmness that comes, it's a sense of offering. I see a fire ceremony such as that as an affirmation of a desire of the heart of where we started this conversation today. Is we have to begin with the light bulb has to want to change in order for it to be changed. And we have to, I guess you could say that is the quality of willingness, of being willing to change when circumstances around us are trying to change us, but using our intuition to go in the right way, to cooperate with life rather than to resist life and to follow the dictates of our egoic desires, which is a tendency of all of us, and rather than to feel the dictates of our higher nature trying to encourage us to go in this way or that in a proper way for our own benefit, and to cooperate with that. In a sense, that's the story of the Bhagavad Gita, is you have the two sides, the two armies on the battlefield dictating for control of our consciousness inwardly, each one fighting for supremacy and feeding us in our own inner nature, feeding us do this, do that. And we are in the position of Arjuna, making the choice of to whom are we going to listen, and to whom will we pledge our allegiance. And in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna, when he's between those two armies, he drives there, he becomes discouraged, and he vents his complaints to Krishna, who is driving that chariot, and he tells all the reasons why he doesn't want to fight, reasons very, to him, quite logical, why it's a bad thing that he's about to engage in. And he's confused. And Krishna, of course, representing God, the higher self, the Guru, whatever we choose, advises him. And I've always felt that you could say the most important point in the Bhagavad Gita is when Krishna or Arjuna, after he's vented all these reasons, and he's slumped in his chariot, is he says to Krishna, I'm not going to fight, I don't know what to do, you guide me. And he asks for help. And I always thought that right there is the beginning. That's the beginning of the spiritual path, where we see all the reasons why we should do this, not do that, but we come to the point where we recognize our own human limitation. We see the potentials in our lives and everything, and we've tried perhaps everything by that time, but we come to a point of openness in our life where we ask for help. And it's just inevitable, you could say, in the very asking for help, we have ensured that help will come to us. I mean, it's in the very asking, that help me. When we do that, we have indicated, we have opened the door to the universe, and it comes. It's not a matter of if help will come. It can't help but come. It has to come. I mean, it will come. And because it's the asking for help that draws it to us. And to the degree that we don't ask for help, because I'm not going to ask anybody to help me. I don't need help. I can do it myself. All of those things that it's that side of our nature that resists that is what blocks it. It will block it. But when we honestly in the heart say, I need help. I want help. Sooner or later it will happen. But the trick, of course, is to keep the heart open to that help. Is to stay that way, because we open it for a moment and it closes, open, closes, open, closes. But in the opening, and we keep it open, that help will come. And I think, and when if we see a divine potential in the very ability to see a potential, implies that it's only a matter of time before that potential will be realized. Mama Dog probably doesn't perceive the potential yet. And so it's going to still take her a little bit of time. Maybe we're helping her, I don't know. But once you perceive that potential, you might say it's almost the game is over, because it's just now it's only a matter of time. And then that is in our hands to the degree that we're willing to allow that transformation to take place. I don't think we really do it, but we open ourselves to allow, like the light bulb, to be changed.